So appreciate y'all praying for my mother-in-law. She's out of the hospital, so keep praying for her. Y'all won't see her for a couple weeks, but she was doing pretty good yesterday, and I guess she had a long night. She stays awake all night, and pretty rough on her, but she was doing pretty good yesterday. She got out a couple times and got out on the porch and sat out on the porch, and so anyway, we thank the Lord that she's out of the hospital and at least feeling a little bit better. She said it did knock her winding pretty good. It was worse than what she was sicker than what she thought she was. But anyway, so if you have your Bible, turn to 2 Kings chapter number 13. 2 Kings chapter number 13, and this is the last mention of Elisha that we have here in Kings, and so this will be the last lesson on Elisha. And so we've been after Elisha for a good long while now, and then we deviate into some of the kings of Israel, some of the kings of Judah. But this will be the last lesson on Elisha. And it's an interesting passage, and so every time I read it, I'm surprised at how it goes. And so anyway, we'll read it one more time here in chapter number 13, verse number 14. It says, "Now Elisha was fallen sick of his sickness, whereof he died. And Joash the king of Israel came down unto him and wept over his face and said, O my father, the chariot of Israel and the horsemen thereof. And Elisha said unto him, Take bow and arrows. And he took unto him bow and arrows. And he said to the king of Israel, Put thine hand upon the bow. And he put his hand upon it, and Elisha put his hands upon the king's hands. And he said, Open the window eastward. And he opened it. Then Elisha said, Shoot. And he shot. And he said, The arrow of the Lord's deliverance, and the arrow of deliverance from Syria. For thou shalt smite the Syrians in Aphek till thou have consumed them. And he said, Take the arrows. And he took them, and he said unto the king of Israel, Smite upon the ground. And he smote thrice and stayed. And the man of God was wroth with him, and said, Thou shouldest have smitten 5 or 6 times. Then hast thou smitten Syria till thou hast consumed it. Whereas now thou shalt smite Syria but thrice. And Elisha died, and they buried him. And the bands of the Moabites invaded the land at the coming in of the year. And it came to pass, as they were burying a man, that behold, they spied a band of men, and they cast the man into the sepulchre of Elisha. And when the man was left down and touched the bones of Elisha, he revived and stood up on his feet. So we're going to stop reading right there. And so again, Elisha's ministry, just for a little background, again, it's been a little while since we talked about Elisha. But if you recall, Elisha was chosen by God. And God told Elijah to anoint Elisha. And Elisha was out there plowing with the oxen, and here come Elijah, and he threw his mantle upon him. And then he basically became Elijah's, protege. He became his sidekick for a little while as he learned under Elijah. The Bible really doesn't tell us a whole lot about how Elijah taught Elisha. It doesn't really go into a long amount of details, but we know that Elisha was with Elijah whenever Elijah was taken up in the whirlwind. And that mantle come down to Elisha, and the first thing he did was he walked up to that river Jordan and said, Hey, where is the God of Elijah? And smote that water and walked across on dry land. And so we followed his ministry. We followed his ministry whenever he raised the Shunammite son to life, and we followed his ministry whenever he cleansed the leper. We followed his ministry all down through. And now we get to the end of his ministry. We followed him up to Jehu. And you know, God had told Elijah to anoint Jehu. And he told Elijah to anoint Hazael, king of Syria, Jehu, king of Israel, and Elisha. And the only one that we ever see that he truly anointed was Elisha. But word came to Elisha, and Elisha told Hazael he was going to be king of Syria, and he also sent one of the sons of the prophets to anoint Jehu. And after that, we don't hear anything out of, he tells him, you go anoint him, and you don't hear anything out of him, Brother Croft. And so, but in the time from Jehu to here can be up to about 50 years. In the time from when Jehu was anointed king until this moment right here could be up to 50 years. Jehu was king in Israel for 28 years. Jehoahaz, who was Jehu's son, was king for 17 years. And so that's 45 years. That's 45. And then you have Joash was king for 16 years. So actually it would have been 61 years. So there's a 61-year window. Now, again, chronologically, sometimes it gets a little confusing because if you actually read the previous verses, which we did not read, you actually have an account of Jehoahaz king, and then Joash king, and then Jeroboam, who was Joash's son, king. But then and when you hit to verse 14, Joash is king again. So chronologically, it gets a little confusing, and it doesn't tell us at what year in the reign of Joash this conversation with Elisha takes place. But like I said, at 28 and 17, you're 45. And so then you've got a 16-year window. You've got a 16-year window right there. So anywhere from 45 years to 61 years from the time that Jehu was anointed king, this conversation takes place. And God doesn't tell us anything about what's going on in Elisha's life for all that time. For all that time, Elisha is still the man of God. He's still the prophet of God, but God doesn't mention anything that happens. And we know from reading our Bible, to me it's very disappointing. We're going to see it in just a second, but it's very disappointing to me that Jehu was anointed king, and he did such a good job. We talked about it weeks ago. He did such a good job of taking Baal out of Israel. But he did not take those sins of Jeroboam. He did not take those golden calves out of Israel. And so they continued to worship them golden calves. And so then his son Jehoahaz comes in and takes over for 17 years. And the same thing happens. He comes in and he did evil in the sight of the Lord. And you never hear anything that Elisha came to him. And then you get to Joash right here, and it's the exact same thing. If you look in verse number 9 of this chapter, it says, and Jehoahaz slept with his fathers, and they buried him in Samaria, and Joash his son reigned in his stead. And in the 37th year of Joash king of Judah, Jehoash the son of Jehoahaz to reign over Israel in Samaria, and he reigned 16 years. Verse number 11, and he did that which was evil in the sight of the Lord. He departed not from all the sins of Jeroboam, the sons of Nebat, who made Israel to sin, but he walked therein. And so again, like I said, you got Jehu walking in those sins, you got Jehoahaz walking in those sins, now you have Jehoash walking in those sins. His son Jeroboam's going to walk in those sins. They're just going to keep walking in those sins. And so, but here, now, in verse number 14, Elisha is fallen sick. And obviously, he's an old man, because if you take the 61 years and the 12 years that Jehoram reigned before that, now you're at 73 years, and however old he was before Elijah even anointed him, I mean, you're pushing up close to 100 years old. You're pushing close to 100 years old. And so when he found out he was sick, here's the king of Israel. He finds out he's sick, And I got to thinking about this right here. He says and Joash, in verse 14, king of Israel came down unto him and wept over his face, and said, O my father, the chariot of Israel and the horsemen thereof. And we've heard it mentioned many times before, and I just thought about it again. I thought, it's almost like people that come to a funeral, and I'm gonna call it act of fool at a funeral. I mean, you'll see people where they almost climb in a casket, Brother Croft. They almost climb in a casket. They're weeping in that casket. They're crying, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry, I love you, I'm so sorry. It's too late. It's too late. It's too late whenever, you know what I mean? If you want to get right now. If you want to get right now. Don't wait till someone's in a casket. I mean, if you're married, don't wait till your wife's in the casket and then you buy the biggest bouquet of flowers. Now, I'm not a flower guy, and my wife loves them, and I don't buy them enough, but you understand what I'm saying. Don't you go buy, this great big huge, I forget what they call them, a spray or whatever. Anyway, my wife orders flowers all the time, and I still don't know what they're called. But anyway, I want the biggest arrangement you can make from the flower shop down there in Calhoun. Well, she's dead. She's not going to see them. She's dead. She's not going to see them. If you want to buy her a big old flower arrangement, buy her a big. I'm going to get in trouble. I'm going to buy a flower arrangement now. You know that, Brother Croft. I'm in so much trouble. Anyway, yeah, I actually got in trouble. This is inside baseball right here. I actually got in trouble. My wife's like, hey, my mother-in-law, your mother-in-law really wants some flowers. So it was early in the morning. I'm like driving to Alabama, and she's like, she really wants some flowers. And so I walked in the kitchen, and there was some fresh flowers there, Brother Jay. So I'm like, hey, bub, take these down to the hospital and drop them off on your way into work. Mama wants some flowers. And so anyway, so we had some fresh flowers. So we sent them some fresh flowers. But like I said, I mean, don't buy flowers for their funeral when you never bought them for them whenever they were alive. It drives me crazy. You go to a funeral, and the people that treated them the worst are the ones that act out the most. The people that treated them the worst are the ones that act out the most. They're just awful. And you're like, oh, great, they're going to make a scene. And it's like, they're dead. They can't hear you. They can't talk to you. They can't say, okay, you're forgiven now. They can't say, you know what, I love you too. They can't say any of that. But they can say all of that while they're alive. And so here is this guy that we just read that said he did evil in the sight of the Lord, and he departed not from the sins of Jeroboam. Here he comes to Elisha, and he's like, oh, my father, my father. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous what he did. If Elisha was so precious to Joash, why didn't he repent and turn? I mean, and I used it in a marital relationship or a father-son relationship. But you see people like that in church, or not in church. Let me rephrase that: not in church. I tell you what, that guy's my pastor. Well, I've been going here 5 years. I've never seen you. That guy's my pastor. Brother Sammy's my pastor. Why, like I said, I've been here 5 years. I've never seen you darken the door of the church. We're here Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night. We got revivals all the time. We got the camp. I've never seen you at the camp. And we were only off for just a month or two during COVID. I've never seen you here. Oh, I tell you what, I love Brother Sammy. And I think a lot of people in their mind, they do. But just like Jesus said, if you love me, keep my commandments. If you love me, keep my commandments. If you really love me that much, Joash, why are you still worshiping them golden calves? We don't even worship the same God. You're the king of Israel. You truly, if you think about it, came from nowhere. You were not in line to be a king. But I anointed your granddad to be king, and your granddad turned his heart from God, and then your dad took over, and he followed in the path of your granddad. And so again, it's a choice. When you get to the age of everyone in this room right here, you cannot blame your dad, you can't blame your granddad, you can't blame anyone else but your own choice. You can choose for yourself, I'm going to serve God or I'm not going to serve God. Don't tell me how you were raised. I don't want to hear how you're raised, because God gives you a choice and you can walk away from that. And I understand that there are times that Brother Jay, that it's hard. It's hard. I mean, I looked in the, unfortunately, Brother Parks, I look in the arrest log from up home. And it's probably a bad habit I had. I used to work in Augusta at a hospital, and I used to work in this hospital, Brother West, and they wouldn't let me service their air compressors till like 11 or 12 o'clock at night. And so they'd tell me, hey, come in at 10 o'clock, and then I would have to come in. I had to call the nurse's station and talk to the surgeons, or talk to the nurse who was over the surgery department, and then they would tell me, okay, we're done surgery, you can service the air compressors. And so they had the little maintenance room, and they had one of them busted magazines, Brother Croft, and I love them busted magazines. I don't know why I get entertainment out of reading them magazines, but it's over there. It's closer to where Brad lives over there. It's over there near Augusta, and there's a lot of people get arrested in Augusta. That's all I got to say. There's a lot of people, and they had them magazines, and whoever it was in there, he always had one of them busted magazines. I'm just flipping through, and there was one page they had like the repeat offender of the month or whatever, and they would have all their mug shots. I mean, you're just going down through, and you're like 1999, 2000. There'd be 4 or 5 in 2000, and there's just a whole page of just mugshot after mugshot after mugshot, and I just like looking at them things, and so I look at the one locally, and then I'll call my sister. I'm like, hey, I see so and so's got arrested, so and so, and there's this family. There is this family that whenever we were kids, it's actually, I told you about him because I got in a fight with the one boy, but him and his brother, the state took them away from their parents. The state took them away from their parents and put them in foster care. But guess what? They are repeat offenders in the arrest log up there. And so I opened it up the other day, and I looked, and there was his smiling face. And I'm like, there's a kid that it was bred in him to be a criminal, Brother Jay. And there was a short window of time whenever he was taken from that home and put into foster care, which, whatever you want to think of foster care. But anyways, put into foster care, but he had a chance, Brother Tyrone, to make a choice. He had a chance to make a choice. And now he's an adult. He's not 12, 13 years old anymore. Now he's an adult, and he's made his choice, Brother Jay, and his choice was to follow in the life of crime that his dad taught him. But it was his choice. They didn't, the sheriff's office, the Garrett County Sheriff's Office doesn't say, all right, here we go. As soon as he turns 18, we're going to arrest him just because we know he's going to turn out like his dad. That's not how the criminal justice system works. What happened was he went out and did something he wasn't supposed to do, and they arrested him. And like, why are y'all picking on me? We're not picking on you. You did something you wasn't supposed to do, and we arrested you for it. And so here you have Joash, and he comes to Elisha, and he's like, oh, my father, my father. And it's so fake. It's so fake. Again, I think in his mind, he's like, man, this is awful. Because it was going to be awful. But you got to think, the judgment hand of God was on Israel while Elisha was their prophet, while he was their man of God. If you look in verse number, we'll look in verse number 7. Jehoahaz here, and neither did he leave of the people to Jehoahaz but 50 horsemen, and 10 chariots, and 10,000 footmen, for the king of Syria had destroyed them, and had made them like the dust by threshing. So here Elisha is the prophet, while Jehoahaz is king. Jehoahaz was Jehu's son. And the Bible says that basically God let the king of Syria, which, God told Elijah that's what was going to happen. God told Elijah that, hey, who Hazael, king of Syria, doesn't take out, Jehu's going to take out, and who Jehu doesn't take out, Elisha's going to take out. So God told Elijah that this day was coming. Elisha knew this day was coming. But because Israel continued to follow in the sins of Jeroboam, again, Jehu did kick Baal out, but they did not turn back to God. They turned to those golden calves and followed those golden calves. God continued to punish Israel and continued to allow Syria to punish Israel. And so here is Joash, and sometimes it's almost like he looked at Elisha like, well, God's going to protect Israel because Elisha's here. And so he's really important to me because I don't want God to punish Israel, but I'm not going to change. I'm not going to change. I'm not going to change my lifestyle. And if you think about it, again, Elisha was the man of God. When God was punishing them, it wasn't Elisha holding God's judgment back. God's judgment was caused by the king and the people following the king doing evil. And so that king had just as much influence or more, because that man of God, that we talked about it last week, how Jehoiada kept them in line, but once Jehoiada passed away, his sons came and he couldn't keep them in line. And God judged them for that. And so now you have a king that has a choice. Once you take over, it's not, well, I got to do what my dad said to do. Once you take over, well, I got to do what my granddad said to do. That's not what you have to do at all. Your granddad is dead. Your dad is dead. They're not king anymore. They're not the king anymore. And so if they're not the king anymore, you're the guy that makes the decisions. And you got two choices. I can keep, actually you got three. I can keep doing what they were doing. I can be more evil than what they were doing. Or I can turn from what they were doing and turn to God and start doing what God wants me to do. But they took the easy route. I'm just going to keep on doing what they were doing. And even though God is going to tell him, hey, I'm going to lighten up. I'm going to let you defeat Syria. I'm going to let you defeat Syria. It was not because he turned back to God. It's a shame. But he comes to Elisha and he's like, oh, my father, the chariot of Israel and the horsemen thereof. And it sounds really good. Words sound really good. But you know what is better than words? Actions. I can tell my wife, and again, I am in so much trouble, I'm going to have to buy flowers. Anyway, so I can tell my wife, sweetheart, I'm going to buy you the prettiest bouquet of roses you've ever seen. Every day this week, Miss Jimmy. I can say, sweetheart, I know you're down there, and I don't want to say you're stuck with your mom, but, kind of you're stuck with your mom right now because you're both in quarantine. And so, you're just down there and you're stuck with your mom and everything. And so I'm going to buy you the prettiest bouquet of roses. Oh, sweetheart. And I'll give her just a little bit of a thrill, Brother Croft, because she said, oh, he loves me. He's thinking about me. But Brother Jay, by Saturday, or let's say Saturday the 10th or Sunday the 11th, if there hadn't been no flowers, If I call and say, sweetheart, I love you so much. I love you so. I'm going to buy you the prettiest. You know what she's going to say, Brother Parks? She's going to say, you're just a liar, and just stop. Just stop, because all you're doing is lying to me. And so here, that's what these words sound like to me. He comes to Elisha, and he doesn't say, I am so sorry. I am so sorry. There was the greatness of Elisha. You were such a great man of God. You never wobbled. You never wavered. You were such a great man of God. My granddad should have listened to you. My father should have listened to you. And I should have came to you the moment I turned king and said, things are going to change around here. But that's not what he did. So these are just words. When Elisha said these words, whenever Elijah went up in a whirlwind, they meant a whole lot more than whenever Joash is saying these words to Elisha, because again, they were just words. And so we have a choice. We have a choice of how we are going to live our life. We have a choice of how we're going to live our life. Again, like I said, you talk to people. You're like, you talk to people and they're like, hey, I go to church. And oh, okay, yeah, good. Well, where do you go to church at? I go to, and they'll if they're lucky, they name the church. And you're like, oh yeah, I know that. What's that pastor's name down there? Well, actually, it's been a little while. And you want to say, yeah, I know. I know. I can visually, I can see that it's been a little while since you've been to church. And again, I mean, God does look on the heart, but man looks on the outside, and you can tell by appearances a lot of times, Brother Parks. And again, appearances are not everything. There are people that are just getting right with God. They're just getting right with God. They're just learning. They're just growing. But when you tell me you've been saved for 30 years, and you're dressing like the world, acting like the world, talking like the world, every time they're telling a dirty joke, you're either right in the middle, you're the one telling it, or you're the one that's laughing the loudest. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. You're selling, but I'm not buying. And so you have a choice. We all have a choice. And you can come up and say, oh, I love God so much. I love Jesus so much. Well, prove it to me. Okay, let me tell you how much I love him. No, I don't want to hear how much you love him. I don't mind hearing how much you love him. But I want you to show me. I want you to show me. What's different about you? Well, what's different about you? If they walk into the place you work at, and again, like I said, it's hard because you're in your work uniform and you're doing your job. But if they walk into the place you work at, Chris, do they know you're different? If they walk around and talk to people and say, hey, you got any Christians? You got any Christians that work here? Will they say, I tell you what, that Chris McCracken's a Christian? Why? And again, lost people will just say it. You know what I mean? They'll just say it. They'll be like, yeah, that guy right there, he's different. If we tell a joke, he walks away. He won't laugh about it. If we're talking bad, he's like, I don't want to hear all this. I don't want to hear this. And again, like I said, I started to say we're all grown men in here, but we're not all grown men in here, but we're all grown-ups in here. And you understand, when you're out in the world, you're going to hear stuff. You just are. You just are, and you can't, you can say, hey, buddy, would you please? And sometimes they will, sometimes they won't. They just don't care. But you don't have to participate in it. You don't have to be part of it. Because I tell you what, you participate in it too long, you'll be participating in it. Oh, I'm so sorry. It'll take you years to recover from an I'm so sorry. It'll take you years of recovering your testimony from one, I'm so sorry. It'll take you years to recover. Why? Because they're watching you and they know you're different. And the world knows. They know. They know if you do something out of line, they're like, well, I thought you were a Christian. I thought you were a Christian. Why? Because the world knows how you ought to act. You know, they want to say, don't judge me, but they're judging you. They're judging you the whole time. And you do something that they're like, well, Christians don't act that way. Oh, you know, I'm just having a bad day. No, it'll take you years. It'll take you years. They'll be like, you're just a hypocrite. And again, there's been a problem because I think a lot of times the world looks at us like we want the world to act like us. No, we want you to fall in love with Jesus. We want you to get saved, and if you get saved, you'll change how you act. We shouldn't ever be out there trying to tell the world, hey, you need to act like us because you'll be better because you act like us. They'll die and go to hell if they just act like us, Brother Croft. If they don't meet God, if they don't meet Jesus, if they don't come to a salvation knowledge of Jesus, they're just going to die and go to hell. And they can put a tie on, they can put a suit on, they can walk right, spit white, they can do all that stuff. They can put away their alcohol, they can put away the cigarettes, they can turn the bad music off, they can go away from their drugs, they can do all of that stuff and be like, see, I act just like you. But unless they know Jesus, it didn't do them any good. It didn't do them any good. And so here is a man that said, oh, Elisha, my father, my father. But in his lifestyle, he didn't say, my father, my father. He said, look, that's good for you, old man, but I don't really want anything to do with it. And again, like I said, Elisha's dying, and it looks really good what he does. But what's the point? What's the point? And Elisha senses that. He senses that. And so in verse number 15, Elisha said unto him, take bow and arrows. You'll notice he does not speak to him spiritually, Brother Parks. He does not say you need to get right with God. He does not speak to him spiritually. He only speaks to him in the physical aspect of, I know what you came for. You're tired of getting beat by Syria, and you want to know if God's going to do something different about it. I mean, you got to think, how many times did Elisha save Jehoram's life by saying, hey, don't go down there. Don't go over there. He's waiting for you over there. And how is it that they would ever go into battle knowing here's Elisha sitting up there, and how would they go into battle and not say, hey, look, are we going to win this battle? Should we go into this battle? But it's almost like for 45, 50 years, Elisha's just on the sidelines. We got this. We got this. How many people do you know that live their life? They live their life until they find out, oh, I got terminal cancer. Next thing you know, look who's back at church. Look who's calling for the preacher. They've run him down in town. They've run the church down in town, but now they got terminal cancer, and guess what? Hey, preacher, can you come down? Well, sure, I'll be glad to come down. And the church, hey, come back in. We love you, brother. But 40, 50 years, you went out and did your own thing, and you're not trying to get right till you find out you got terminal cancer? How about living like you love God all the time? How about not waiting until Elisha's on his deathbed to realize, hey, you know what? I wish I would have talked to this guy. We all wish, those of us who have lost a parent, I told my sister yesterday, my dad would take like a piece of paper like this, and he would write someone's phone number down on it, brother. And he would write a phone number down on it. And years later, Brother Croft, he would say, all right, there's a piece of paper, and it's an envelope, and it was mailed from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and it's got a coffee mug stain on the top. It's got just half a moon where the coffee stained on it, and on the bottom right corner in red ink there is a number. Miss Jimmy, he could do that. I mean, until he died, he could do that. And so I told my sister, I said, I told her yesterday, I said, I just wish I could hear my dad. I just wish I could hear my dad say, son, I need you to go in my room in the third drawer and open that drawer, and about halfway down, we all have these, anyone who's lost a family member has this conversation you wish you could have with them. But I'm telling you, here's a man that could have known Elisha. His whole, maybe he would have been king for 30, 40, 50 years had he just been right with God. And just because they were right with God didn't always mean that they served a long time. And when they were wrong with God, sometimes God let them serve a long time. But you understand, here is a man who could have known Elisha. And he said, I don't need to know him. He's fine, just up there. And so, but then, now he comes to him, he's like, hey, he said, and Elisha's like, just take bow and arrow. We're not even going to talk spiritual, because that's not what you're interested in. All you want to know is, can you defeat Syria? So he tells him, he said, take bow and arrow. And he took on him bow and arrow, and he said unto the king of Israel, put thine hand upon the bow. And he put his hand upon it. And this is interesting to me, Brother Jay. He takes his hand, and Elisha takes his hands and put his hands over top of Joash's hands. He takes his hands and he puts those hands on there. And again, like I said, here's a man of God that he could have known with them wore out hands that he should have known, and he put them hands that held all the power of God in them. And I wonder what he thought at that moment. I wonder what he thought, Miss Jimmy. Like, I could have known this man. All the power of God is still in them hands. You say, no. Yeah. You heard me read the last part of the chapter, or the last part of the story right here. All the power is still there, Brother Jay. It's just the body's about to die, but all that power is still there. And it's like, man. He put them hands and he says, open the window eastward. And he opens the window eastward and he says, shoot an arrow. And so he shoots an arrow. And he tells him, the arrow of the Lord's deliverance and the arrow of the deliverance from Syria. Thou shalt smite the Syrians in Aphek till thou have consumed them. And so again, here's the words that's what he came up to hear, Brother Croft. He didn't come up to hear, how can I get right with God? He didn't come up to hear, hey, how can I change the trajectory of the kingdom, not only for my kingdom, but I've got a son that I'm raising up. I don't want my son to end up like my father or my grandfather who didn't love God. I want to change that. That's not what he came for. And so Elisha gave him what he came for. Hey, here's the arrow of the Lord's deliverance. You're going to beat Syria. And so then he says in verse 18, this is the part that every time I read it, it says, he said, take arrows, and he took them, and he said unto the king of Israel, smite upon the ground. And he smote thrice and stayed. And again, so when I read this right here, it says, and the next thing says, and the man of God was wroth with him. And sometimes when I read it, Brother Jay, I'm like, well, all he told him to do was smite the ground. All he told him to do was smite the ground. But, if he'd said, hey, look, I want you to understand, when I tell you to smite the ground, how bad do you want to defeat Syria? Smite the ground like that. That isn't what he told him. That is not what he told him. He just said smite the ground. And it's almost like it was Simon Says, Brother Parks, he told him smite the ground, but he didn't tell him to stop. And so he hit the ground, 1, 2, 3. And he stayed. And he looked up like, did I do good? I hit the ground. You only told me to shoot one arrow. I shot one arrow, and you said the arrow of the Lord's deliverance. And Elisha looked at him, and he was mad. And he's like, you just didn't get it. And so a lot of times, again, we're not paying attention enough. We're not paying attention enough. Again, he just said, hey, shoot the arrow of the Lord's deliverance. And so Elisha was expecting him to say, hey, we're not talking about the president of the United States here that doesn't know Rocky Road from butter pecan ice cream. You know what I mean? We're not talking about the guy that's talking one time and then he starts, guys, we need to do this. And then starts talking. We're not talking about a man that's out of his head. Elisha was not out of his head. He was... Sorry, that's my alarm. He was still in his right mind. And again, Chris, like I said, he just told him, shoot that arrow. It's the arrow of the Lord's deliverance. That arrow had nothing to do with God delivering them. That physical arrow had nothing to do. It was the application of, hey, the arrow of the Lord's deliverance. Same thing with them arrows smiting the ground. Those arrows were not going to defeat Syria, but it was the attitude. It was the attitude of, hey, I want to defeat them. I understand that this is more than just a physical beating on the ground. This has a greater application. And so, but again, Brother Jay, had he known Elisha, maybe he would have understood. Had he chose to have a relationship with Elisha, maybe he would have understood that it was more than just, I'm the king of Israel and you're asking me to take arrows and smack the ground? This is childish. This is childish. Why would I'm just going to sit here and just beat the ground? This is childish. I'm not. And so he only hit the ground 3 times. And Elisha was wroth. And again, a lot of times I read it, I'm like, well, I mean, you could have told him. You could have told him hit the ground 5 or 6 times. How bad do you want to defeat him? But again, he should have got the application himself. And he should have just been beating the ground until Elisha said, all right, that's enough. That's enough. You know what I mean? I mean, you're there, you're like, oh, my father, the chariot of Israel and the horsemen thereof. And he tells you what to do. Why would you stop on your own? If he told you to do it, just keep doing it. Until he's like, okay, that's enough. You're good. But it was an attitude. It was an attitude that he had. And that attitude that he had was not really that he wanted to truly destroy Syria. I just need to get a little pressure off. How many people come to church? Again, my father, the chariot of Israel. They come to church when they're in distress. But as soon as the pressure comes off, I'm good. And run right back to the old lifestyle. Run right back to the whatever they were into before. It's crazy. But it happens over and over and over. It's a process that you see anyone that's been in church for very long at all, you've seen it repeated over and over and over and over again. And you're like, oh, we're so excited. We're glad to see you. We're so happy to see you. We're glad you're here. I'm so glad. I'm in love with Jesus now. I've been wrong for so long, but I'm right now. I'm good. And 2 weeks later, you can't find them with the FBI, brother. You can't find them with the FBI. Why? Because they only wanted some relief. They really didn't want deliverance. That's all they wanted was just a little bit of relief. Just you see it like someone will go in for a medical test, and they're like calling all the people they know, please pray for me, please pray for me, please pray for me. And they'll show up to church, and then as soon as the test comes back negative, they're like, all right, I'm good. All right, time to party. And you're like, no, it's not time to party. It's not time to party. You were scared to die. You were scared to die. And we cut a tree down at Dakota's the other day, and the tree was leaning way over. And Dakota's like, I want it to go this way. I'm like, Dakota, that tree is forked and it's leaning this way. We can't get in there to it to pull it. I'm not comfortable pushing it. Unfortunately, the way that tree's leaned its whole life is how it's going to fall. And again, it doesn't mean that if you lean towards hell all your life, you can't get saved in the end and go to heaven. But I'm telling you, if every chance you get, you lean that way, and the only time you want to lean towards heaven is whenever you think you're in trouble, you might get hit in a car, or you might pull out of the church parking lot right here and get T-boned and not have time to repent, not have time to get right with God. You might be riding down the interstate like they were just a week and a half ago or whatever. That girls' home bus and 2 tractor and trailers sandwiched that bus, and all them kids went out into eternity, bam, just like that, in a moment. You don't have that option. And when God throws you out a lifeline, you don't say, hey, I'll take that lifeline until I'm into the shallow water. And as soon as I'm in the shallow water, okay, God, I don't need your lifeline anymore. I'm going to go back to swimming again. He didn't want deliverance. He just wanted some relief. That's all he wanted. And so then Elisha told him, he said, look, you should have smitten 5 or 6 times. Thou hast smitten Syria till thou hast consumed it, whereas now thou shalt just smite Syria but thrice. He said, you'll win a few battles, but you're not going to win the war. You'll win a few battles. You'll feel better. You'll knock them back a little bit. You'll make them think about it twice before they fight you, but you could have won the war. You could have dropped the atomic bomb on them. You could have dropped the bomb till the Japanese said, well, no more. I don't want any more. But instead, nah, it's just going to be, you're just going to have to keep fighting them. So, I'm going to stop right there. I'm going to stop right there this morning. Thank y'all. Appreciate you being here.